On March 22, 1989, an oil tanker had reached the Alaska Marine Terminal in Alaska at 11:30 p.m. It had a crew of 20 with the captain. The crew of the terminal and the ship began loading the ship with crude oil at an impressive rate of 100,000 barrels an hour. The next morning, March 23, 1989, was a rest day for the crew of the Exxon Valdez. Marine pilot William Murphy, who had piloted the Exxon Valdez into the port previous night, drove Captain Joseph Heselwood along with Chief Engineer and Radio Officer into the town of Valdez. The scheduled time for Exxon Valdez's departure is at 10 p.m. that night. The sailing time was changed as the three officers arrived back at 8:24 p.m. Pre-voyage tests have begun by the radio officer Robertson. Captain Heselwood left the bridge at 9:35 p.m. and did not return until about 11:10 p.m. Even though there was against Exxon Company policy that two officers are required to be present on deck. On his absence, the ship was under pilot Murphy. At 10:49 p.m., the Exxon Valdez has passed Valdez Narrows, few miles off the coast. At 11:10, Captain Heselwood returned as Murphy disembarked from the ship with his third mate cousins. At 11:30, Heselwood informed the Valdez Traffic Center that he was turning the ship towards east on heading of 200 degrees. After 20 minutes since the departure of Exxon Valdez, multiple course corrections were made without reporting to the traffic center. At 11:52 p.m., the command was given to onboard autopilot system, which had instructions to increase speed from 55 rpm to sea speed full ahead at 78.7 rpm after 45 minutes. Minutes before the next day, which is a Good Friday, March 24, 1989, the cousins thought it was time to turn the vessel back towards the traffic lanes. At the same time, Lookout Officer Maureen Jones reported that Bly Reef light appeared broad off the starboard bow. The light should have appeared on the left side if they were right on the course. Its position was not where it's supposed to be, and the ship was accelerating from the instructions set on autopilot towards close waters. Realizing that the ship is in its collision course, they gave right rudder command and took the ship off of autopilot. They phoned Heselwood to bring him up to speed about the situation, and the crew suddenly felt very sharp jolts from the ship, which occurred at 12:04 a.m. The vessel came to rest. 8 of 11 cargo tanks were punctured. Onboard computers were reading loss of 5.8 million gallons of crude oil in the first few hours. After the rumbles that spread the entire vessel, Heselwood rushed to the deck. Chief Mate Kunkel informed about the initial damage assessment. Later on, Heselwood ordered the vessel's engine to be reduced to idle speed. At 1:41 a.m., after spewing millions of gallons of crude oil into the water, Heselwood gave up his efforts to get the vessel off the reef. 10 hours after the spill and no sight of emergency spill prevention crew. March 25, 1989, some helicopters used lasers to set some patches of oil on fire to prevent spreading. Dead birds are being spotted on the shoreline. The feathers that protect them from cold and water are now covered with oil, which makes them freeze or drown in the water. The waves push the oil over the barriers and has thickened to a gummy tar. It is the season where brown bears wake up from hibernation and are in search of food, and so is the time for other animals like eagles, foxes, and wolverines. Once dead, these oily creatures wash up to the shore, and the animals that feed on them is quite deadly for them, so the cleanup team bagged the dead as much as they could. The oil affected zooplankton primarily, as the small fish feed on them, and in turn birds and other wildlife feed on them. Hundreds of otters were brought to the nearest sanctuaries, but only to be euthanized with a drug called T61, which induces a quick and painless death. It's a sad chain of death and destruction. After 2 months after the wreck, the oil slick has slithered 550 miles and polluted 800 miles of shoreline. 5 national wildlife ranges and 3 national parks were hit. After 4 months, the entire effort by the cleanup team covered only about 5% of the oiled areas. As for the captain, Joseph Hazelwood went to court on March 23, 1990, 1 day short of exactly 1 year after the disaster. Hazelwood was found not guilty of felony mischief, operating a vessel while under influence of alcohol. However, he was found guilty of discharging of oil. For that, he was sentenced to serve 1,000 hours of community service cleaning oiled beaches. Fast forward to 2018, people have dug not too deep into the beach sand in certain areas only to discover their hands were getting greasier, and a puddle of oil had surfaced from Exxon Valdez disaster which happened 32 years ago. But let's ask the question that made you watch this video. Did we actually recover from the spill? The answer to that is, I'll leave you with a statement given by Oil Spill Commission. And I quote, "Something sacred had been defiled, the most important loss for many who will never visit Prince William Sound was the aesthetic sense that something sacred in the relatively unspoiled waters of Alaska had been defiled."